Hi, my name is Jonathan Clark. Welcome to part 3 of my 4-part tutorial series about Jamstix. Jamstix is software that lets you create really realistic sounding, amazing drum tracks if you're doing music production or simple recording, home studio, bedroom studio, even in a real studio. It's pretty awesome stuff. Even professionals can use this software. Now, the last video in the series, number 2, I talked about the kit and I talked about the mixer. For this video, I'm going to go into the transport section in more depth. I'm going to go into the song sheet. I'm going to go into the song tab on the main menu in more depth. And I'm also going to talk about how the brain works. Now, I think in one of my earlier videos I mentioned that I'm probably going to do one song at the very end as a separate video that kind of lets you see how I build a song from the very beginning to a finally fully produced song that I'll release on the internet. And it's almost as if you're watching me over the shoulder doing my work. I think what I'm going to do though, instead of one, I'm going to do 2. And the reason for that is I'm going to pick 2 different styles, and so you can just see slightly different approaches to each of the 2. So for one of them, I'm going to do an indie folk rock sort of song, and it'll be, a basic, realistic sounding kit, and I'll add a bass line, I'll add guitar, I'll probably add keyboards of some type of keyboards, some synths and some pads, perhaps, and I'll bring in a vocalist and get him or her to sing, and we'll create a whole song that way. The second one that I'll do, same concept, except I'm going to do a deep house track for that. And the reason I'm picking deep house is because if I was doing something like some styles like trance or something, I might want very, very rigid drums and rhythm section that very specifically fall exactly on the beat, very machine-like. But with deep house, it's nice to have a little bit more of a human feel to it. So with the deep house track, I'll probably end up putting my kick, building it from scratch using MIDI on a song sheet, in a DAW, and then I will bring in some Jamstix stuff on top with like the hi-hats and the snare and give it a little bit more realistic feel. And then I'll bring in some other instruments, like I'll have to obviously have bass, keys, pads, maybe a Rhodes sounding piano, stuff like that, maybe a vocalist on that one too. Okay, so you can look forward to those at the end. Now, the first 2 videos, I tried to stay away from MIDI as much as possible for people that don't fully understand how MIDI works. With this video, we're starting to get into the more advanced stuff. So if you're just looking to use Jamstix as a jam partner, or for very simple construction of songs, recording, you don't really need to use MIDI. But some of the features I'm going to talk about in this video, you are definitely going to need some understanding of MIDI. And don't let that scare you away. Even if you don't understand MIDI yet and you don't need to use the advanced features, I think it'll be very useful for you to watch this, because if you are going to get into more advanced production eventually, which hopefully everybody will be, everybody wants to develop and get better at stuff, then eventually you are going to have to learn how to use MIDI. Or you probably should learn how to use MIDI, because it does, MIDI had a bad reputation for terrible sounds and stuff 20 years ago, but now it's an essential part of studio production in a lot of professional studios. Okay, so if you watch this, even if you don't understand how MIDI works right now, I think it's going to give you some hints and you'll understand some basic concepts, so when you go to learn how to use MIDI elsewhere, eventually some of the stuff that you learn will make a lot more sense because of what you get out of this video. Okay, I've said this is video number 3. If you missed the first video in the series, or the first 2, I'll put a link underneath so you can go back and watch those first if you'd prefer. Annotations, I sometimes use annotations to make corrections in my videos, to clarify points and stuff like that. If you're watching on a mobile device, you probably can't see them. YouTube doesn't show them on a lot of mobile devices right now. That's unfortunate. You might miss out on a little bit of stuff, but don't worry about it. Hopefully, not critical if you can't see them right now. Also, if you have questions, I definitely try to answer them under my YouTube videos, but 2 things. First of all, I work in a remote camp doing forestry work for 9 months of the year, so a lot of the year I don't have much internet access. So it might be a while before I answer. Knowing that, it might be smart for you to check out the Razun forums online because they are good at answering stuff. Also, something I've just noticed recently, people somehow are able to post questions on my YouTube videos using, I think it's coming through Google+, and sometimes because of their settings, I can't actually reply to them. So I'm finding this pretty frustrating because, you know, I know there's people out there that ask me a question, they think I'm going to answer, I want to answer, and I just can't. And so people think I'm ignoring them. That's not good, okay? So, sorry, nothing I can do. Now in the last two videos, I used Pro Tools in the first one as a host, DAW. I used Cubase in the second one. This time I'm going to use a program called Reaper, R-E-A-P-E-R. Pretty cool program. It wasn't around for a long time. So back when programs like Sonar, Cubase, Pro Tools and stuff like that were being developed for the last 10 or 15 years, Reaper didn't exist for that whole time. So not as well known, but in the last few years, it's definitely gotten a lot of attention. It's a pretty full-featured, professional audio editor, deals with MIDI. And the neat thing about it is that if you want to try it out, the demo version that's good for a month is absolutely fully featured. There's nothing missing. The whole thing is available for you to play with, to use for 30 days. Also, they only have one version of the program, which I personally think is kind of cool, because a lot of programs, like you have your light version, your standard version, your pro version, your full studio version, and so you can buy different levels of the software, which include different feature sets. And I guess it kind of makes sense if you're on a budget and you can't afford the full-fledged studio version. But the neat thing about Reaper is no matter who you are, the whole thing is available to you. Also, the price is amazing. Okay? Use it for free for 30 days. After that, if you want a full license for personal use or for non-commercial use, or even for a small business that's making less than $20,000 a year, they will sell you a license for $60. And you cannot beat that. There's no competing software out there that's anywhere near that cheap. Okay, even if you are using it for commercial use in a large studio, it's only $225 for license, but it gives you access to the same software that you use in the demo. So I highly recommend it. I've played with it before. When we load it up on this computer, it's kind of a new installation because this is a fairly new laptop. But yeah, I recommend that you check that out more. At some point I would love to do a full series of tutorials on Reaper itself, but we'll leave that for another day. And let's get to work on Jamstix right now. Okay, since we're going to use Reaper in this episode of the tutorial series, I probably should show you how to make sure things are set up. Every DAW slightly differently. So we have Reaper set up and running, and the first thing I'm going to want to do is make sure plugins are working. So I go into Options, Preferences. I'm in General right now. Let's scroll down to Plugins, and we will look at VST plugins. Now, VST plugin paths can be multiple paths separated by semicolons. So if you have plugins in several different folders on your computer, that's no problem. Now, I don't have anything here, so I'm going to Add, and I'm going to go on to my standard 64-bit plugin directory, plugins 64, that's where my plugins are located. Click OK, and it's there. So I'm going to rescan because normally when you start your DAW, it scans the plugins folder as it starts up to make sure they all can work. And so rescanning is good. You may find out that rescanning doesn't work with some DAWs. So it's always a good idea, after you first point out a plugins folder to any DAW, it might make sense to shut it down, reboot it from scratch, okay? Now, so Reaper should be set up and running now. Double check, Options, Preferences, VST, it's in there. Okay, we're all good. Okay, so I'm going to go to Track. I'm going to insert a new track, but I'm going to insert a virtual instrument on the new track. And so in my all plugins, you can see I've got all kinds of choices here, specifically within the VSTI folder or within the instruments folder. They appear to be the same thing right now. So Jamstix 3. So I'm going to click OK. Now, do I want to add the following tracks for this effect? If not, only the stereo 1-2s will be audible without further routing. Okay, so if I have, you know that I can have 8 channels of stuff coming through my mixer in Jamstix. So this way, each of those 8 separate mixer channels will be set up with its own track in Reaper. So let's click yes, see what it looks like. Okay, there's Jamstix. And over on the left side, you can see I have all these different, I have 8 new tracks. And so that corresponds to the 8 channels in my mixer. And the reason this might be useful is, like, let's say that part of the kit we want a different reverb than part of the other kit. Or maybe one channel is going to need some EQing that another channel doesn't need. Now, I did mention that a lot of stuff like compression, echo delays, EQing, volume control and stuff can be done within Jamstix, but maybe you've got some external plugins, something like that, that you'd prefer to use. And so that's why it's good to be able to route to 8 separate tracks, or however many tracks you want. Now I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. And let's try that again, there we go. I'm going to do this once more, insert a virtual instrument, Jamstix, OK. This time I'm going to click No, just to keep things simple for this tutorial. So all my routing is done to a single stereo track. Okay. Now I want to build a song quickly here before we do anything else. So let's go into, let's say, Old School Steve. Okay, so I'm going to double click, creates a song, and to make this just a little bit shorter, let's cut out a middle verse, a middle chorus. Okay, and so now the song is all set up. If I go into Reaper, press play, it's going to start playing through. And the reason for this is because the first time playing through, it populates all the data. It does its first performance. You know, all my bars are basically empty until I've played it through once. So let's say, you know, some people may want to go this quickly, just come up with a really standard thing and start using it that way. Some people may want to tweak a lot of the different parameters within the brain, the styles and stuff before you do this. But yeah, for now, let's just let this play. So you can see I'm through my middle 8. I'm getting closer to the end. Coming up to a fill bar. Okay, another chorus. Another chorus. And then our ending. Okay, so I'm going to stop it now. Now, at this point, we have a full song that's been created. Okay, so where do I want to begin? Well, let's start with the transport. Okay, so up here, this button on the left controls the drum kit. This one controls Jamcushion, if you have Jamcushion installed. Both of them can play simultaneously, or you can mute either one or both, I guess. If you want to mute it, hold down the Shift key and click on it. So I'm holding the Shift key now, so drum kit muted, drum kit unmuted, Jamcushion muted, Jamcushion unmuted. Okay. I've covered these already, normal jam, MIDI jam, audio jam. So if you don't have any of these selected, you go into drum module mode. So let's explore that right now. Okay, so this works if you've already got a performance, like say you've created a performance with Jamstix and moved MIDI onto your track, printed it to a track, or recorded it to a track, I guess you could call it whatever you want. Or maybe you've hand-programmed a bunch of MIDI. And so either way, we're using Jamstix just as a drum module, just to use the sounds so that as the MIDI plays, we get the sound of instruments. Okay, so that's drum module mode. So within here, most of this section is for more advanced users. It'll only make sense if you have some understanding of MIDI. Okay, so you click on this Map GM option if you have a kit loaded that doesn't use the GM key layout and you need to send MIDI data in GM format to it. So Jamstix automatically translates the input to match the kit layout. Okay, this next one, if the automatic ride bell is checked, any notes with any ride notes with a velocity of 127, which is full velocity, are translated to ride bell events. Okay, this is useful when you're using an E-drum kit with a single ride zone pad that can only send ride notes. And if you don't understand MIDI, again, values from 0 to 127, 127 is kind of maximum velocity. So to have something at velocity 127, it means you've hit the cymbal as hard as possible. Or you've programmed it and you've drawn in the MIDI, the velocity for that note to be the highest possible value of 127. Okay, and so that's when it translates to a ride bell event. Now this next thing, use TD20 extensions. TD20 it's a pretty nice E-drum kit from Roland. So this is useful if you want to play live into Jamstix with that kit. And I presume it also works for the TD30 and possibly also the TD15 kits. According to the manual, this option modifies hi-hat logic to produce realistic responses when the kit sends a CC4 change after a note is hit. It routes hi-hat rim notes automatically to the corresponding bow notes. It allows hi-hat splashing. And finally, it allows cymbal choking via aftertouch. Now, I don't have one of those kits, so I haven't been able to play with that. Okay, moving on. When you start with cymbal variations, that's a useful option because some basic E-drum kits only have 1 or 2 cymbal pads, and so this option, these two options, can build in some variety. So, makes it more interesting. Now let's take a look at a couple of the jam options in more detail. When you start using Jamstix, you're probably going to start with normal jam mode, but eventually you may progress to play with MIDI jam or audio jam if you're playing along with it, using it as a jam partner. So when you start using MIDI jam, you should use the output trim on the jamming section of the options page. Okay, so let's take a look. Options page, jamming, MIDI trim. Okay, so we'll cover this section in more depth in a few minutes. Same concept with audio jam, right there. You want to use the audio trim. Now there's a plugin called Audio Mate, M8, Audio Mate, okay? So this Audio Mate plugin comes with Jamstix and it's used as an insert effect on audio tracks. And then Jamstix can analyze the audio data from that plugin, from Audio Mate, and it adjusts the power level right here, which affects a lot of the performance decisions of the brain. So this way you can use a guitar or a bass to jam along with Jamstix, and you'll feel the software responding to your actual performance. Okay? Now the power knob, this knob here, this controls the overall power level. And again, this controls performance decisions for the brain. Now you can set it like this as you're playing. You can control it from a controller in your house or from your hardware controller. And as I mentioned, if you're doing audio or MIDI jamming, Audio Mate helps control the power level. Okay, the DYN knob, dynamic knob. This sets the minimum power level allowed, which is important. So the kit will not play any more softly than this value. This keeps the kit from being too quiet in sections where the brain's performance or MIDI data has lower intensity. So if you use a higher value to the right, mouse up, if you use a higher value on this slider, you can keep the volume up, but the brain still performs in a style that matches the power level, even if the power level is low. So think of this kind of as a minimum volume knob. Normally as the power level goes down, the volume also goes down a little bit. But if you keep the volume knob up and your power level's down, you're still going to get good volume out of your kit. So this can be set separately for your drum kit and for Jamcushion if you have Jamcushion. Okay, so this lock button locks Jamstix to the host's position. Okay, so we're at bar 1, beat 3, bar 1, beat 3. And this is normally on by default. For some hosts, if the host is not playing and you want to preview something, remember we had the option to preview stuff. Oh, how do we do this? Well, I guess we need the style loaded. Oh no, I guess you can preview a kit. Okay, so normally, let me cancel that. Normally, you might have to unlock in order to preview when nothing is playing in here. Okay, and that depends on the host. Now the next couple buttons here, 1, 2, 3, these are pretty straightforward. From left to right, this one is go to beginning of song, this one is go back 1 bar, and this one is go forward 1 bar. And I mentioned the snowflake already, which freezes the whole performance. Are you sure you want to freeze the song? I'm not going to do that right now. So this is useful if you're doing an audio or MIDI jam, MIDI jam, and after a good run through that you like, you want to permanently save it. So you'd click freeze. And so when you click freeze after a performance and press play again in the host, Jamstix is going to play an exact repetition of the frozen performance. Even if you keep playing with your controllers or keep sending it new information, it's still going to take that one that you liked. Okay? And yeah, so that's the end of the transport section. So let's move on. Okay, now let's cover a few things with the song sheet that I haven't covered before. So let's say you want to get your MIDI note data into a track that you can actually edit and play with instead of having Jamstix just generate a performance every time. Okay, now you cannot drag and drop performance data into your DAW until you've done a performance. So basically, when you first load Jamstix, it's empty. So you can't drag and drop bars and parts and stuff into it. Even if you've composed your song sheet, you've composed the layout, you have to play it through once first to generate all the MIDI hits and stuff like that. The brain generates it. And then you can start dragging it in. So basically what you do is you hold down the control key in Windows and you just drag and drop. You can do a bar, you can do a whole part, or you can do the whole song. Okay, so let's take a look and watch me do that right now. Okay, so let's try first. We'll go up here, we'll insert a new track. I'll insert 2 new tracks. Okay, so control, I have control held down. I'm going to click on bar 11. I'm going to drag it up here and I'm going to let go. MIDI file import MIDI tempo map to project tempo map starting at 30:04. Well, let's say that we want it at the beginning. That probably makes more sense. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning and I guess I'm creating havoc here. Sorry. Okay, so let's drag bar 11. Control is held down and dragging that, and I'm going to click OK, and you can see from bar 1 to bar 2 there is bar number 1. And if you look at the MIDI note data, it's going to match what's in the now of course this is bar 11 in the song, so I probably should have put it over to the right here a little bit at bar 11, but for the sake of a tutorial it doesn't matter. Now let's say that we want to drag this middle 8 in, so I hit control, click on middle 8, drag it over, let go, click OK, and yep, that's the end of bar 8. There's my 8 bars. And then finally, if you want to do the whole song, click on the name, control held down. Oops, sorry, you have to hold down control first before you click. Bring it up, let go, click OK. Alright, let's see, let's zoom out a little bit. Yep, there's the whole song this time. Okay, and if I want to zoom in quite a bit, now we're pretty far zoomed in. Obviously 12-1-0-0, this is the downbeat of the bar, and you can see the MIDI notes are not consistently on the downbeats. That's good. That's the human variation, humanization feel that the brain is creating to make it sound more realistic instead of putting everything perfectly rigidly on the grid. So yeah, so that's a good thing. Okay, let's go on to live loops, I guess, next. Okay. For the live loops button, well, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but the concept is this. Okay, let's say you've got this set up as a live jam partner. You're playing on stage, and you're playing along, and you suddenly decide, man, this solo's going really well. Let's see if we can extend the solo and do 3 or 4 extra repetitions. Okay, you didn't actually program that into your song layout because you didn't know if you'd be doing it. But with live loops, if it's turned on, you can see that you've got this trigger category. And so basically you can use a controller, like a foot controller or a keyboard controller, something like that. And every part, like your intro, your verse, your chorus, your verse 2, your chorus 2, your middle 8, your chorus 3, ending, each of those parts has a specific trigger from your controller. So if it's keyboard controller, maybe middle C controls verse 1, the C sharp directly above controls chorus 1, D controls verse 2, and so on. So every part has its own little trigger, and so as you're playing along, now this same keyboard that I'm using as a MIDI controller, I'm not also playing piano on it. Let's say that you have several keyboards set up. One is just used as a controller, not for actual notes and stuff like that. So as you're playing along and you think, I want to extend this solo section, you look over at the rest of the band, yeah, let's do another repetition of that, keep going. So you reach over onto your controller, press the trigger for whichever note triggers the solo to play again, and as soon as whatever part you're currently playing ends, then it starts at the beginning of the solo. So even though your song is laid out in linear order on the song sheet, you can play stuff as much as you want. You can jump around back and forth, you can repeat things, totally flexible. You can make the song last for hours if you want. Just keep triggering the beginning of new parts. And if you don't trigger something, when a part ends, then it just moves on to the next part. So it does try to go through in linear order unless you're changing things around. So if you stop changing things around, eventually the song is going to play through and finish. So that's how live loops work. And yeah, it's pretty cool for live performances. Now, let's go into this drop-down menu, and I'll point a few things that I glossed over the last time. So mute has a sub-menu that allows you to mute accents, mute fills, and that's useful if you're composing a groove sometimes. Groove weights exist on every individual beat of the bar at 16th note intervals. So looking at this bar, we have beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you understand music, those are quarter notes. The fraction of a bar that the note is, it's that portion of a bar. So with 4 notes, each one is 1/4 of a full bar. With 8th notes, each one is 1/8 of a full bar. With 16th notes, which is what the resolution of Jamstix is, each note is 1/16 of the bar. So if you were to count across here, there's actually 16 spots in this bar. So these 1, 2, 3, 4 refer to the quarter note downbeats. Sorry, I shouldn't click on those. Those add 8th notes, and then the smallest division, all of them, is the 16th notes. Okay? So the point of it is that the groove weights exist on every individual beat of the bar at 16th note resolution. Possible options are heavy, neutral, and syncopated, and these weights they affect the composition process of the brain, and so they can be useful with less common time signatures, especially because the brain kind of defaults to think 4/4 timing. So anyway, one of the One of the features of the bar editor is that you can mark beats as hits, or you can force silence on them as you're composing. So this choice right here, clear all forced hits and silence, that just clears all those markers on all the bars. Now, I just told you how to control, drag stuff to bring MIDI into your host. If for some reason your host does not allow you to drag and drop MIDI from bars or parts or song, probably all three, then this option right here, export MIDI file, will export your MIDI for you. And then finally, host synchronization. So this is useful sometimes, hopefully this never is the case, but sometimes mistakes are made and a track is recorded at double or half the tempo. Like maybe you're supposed to be recording at 64 beats per minute and you're recording at 128. Or you're supposed to be recording at 128 and you're doing it at 64. Just the musicians, they have the wrong feel. Like they've got the right timing. Anyway, it happens. So if you use this option, see you've got like half speed, double speed, and you've got 0 offsets that you can play with. This lets you double or halve the tempo for Jamstix. And the only problem is it's confusing because it'll leave your Jamstix bar and beat counter out of sync with the one in your DAW. Okay, it'll be going twice as fast or half as fast. Okay, now if you right click on any part in your part list, you have a part menu here that shows up. So most of these choices are pretty self-explanatory. I won't go into detail. So like new part, remove a part, copy a part, load a part, save a part. Pretty straightforward. Now, copy part. Copy part, copy style and drummer, copy fill, copy paste, okay? So you can copy or paste the style or drummer of a single part if the whole song isn't homogeneous. Like say you want to jump around with different styles and drummers within the song. You can do that. Okay, back to the part menu. We have recompose. Remember, every performance is slightly unique. So maybe one particular bar, you don't like the way that the brain composed that bar, so you can just recompose, or a part, whatever. If you want to, you can lock a part, and so lock all bars. Now, watch what happens. Let's see what... okay, verse 1. Verse 1 is bars. It's 4 bars long, but there's 2 repetitions. So this whole part is actually these 8 bars from 3 to 10. Now if I go right click and then click on lock and I lock the bars, watch what happens to the bars down here. They get darker, okay? So the reason for that is you've locked them out so the brain cannot recompose. And then you can, of course, unlock them. Okay? So a locked bar is semi-transparent, and that's useful. What else? Okay, so the currently selected bar is kind of this whitish color, or like orangish at the bottom and more light orange whitish at the top. Okay, so that's the currently selected bar. And the last bar of a part might be brownish orange here, but it's only brown orange if it contains a fill. Okay? What else? The first bar in a part, you can see this one, it has this little red line up and down, and so it's pretty hard to see, but it's there. Now if you right click on a bar, let's right click on bar 6. So it opens up this bar menu. Now that stuff's pretty straightforward. Now let's look at the bar itself again right here. You see this display? This is actually a mini version of the note data that you see over here in the bar editor. Okay, look at the pattern. A little bit of stuff on the left, more on the right. So left and right. Now if I change the view, right now we're looking at the groove aspect of the bar. If I change to accent, these notes change, and this reflects the accent layer now. So watch, they're both going to change simultaneously when I switch to fill. Now we've got this complex fill in the second half of the bar, and that kind of gives you a clue. So that's good, because it kind of gives you a clue as to what's going on as you're playing through. If you're focused on this and not focused on this, this gives you a good picture of what's coming up, I find. I like looking at this a lot more than I like looking at the actual bar editor when I'm in the middle of a performance. Okay, and of course, if you mouse over a bar, look down at this status line. So I mouse over bar 6, and it says this is part of verse 1. It's part of the first repetition of verse 1. It's the 4th bar in the repetition, and it's the 4th bar in the part. If I go over to the end one here, it's the 4th bar in the repetition, but it's the 8th bar in the part. Okay, so lots of useful information in this status line. And I think that's good for the song sheet. Okay, so before I get too deep into the brain, let me define a couple terms that we're going to touch on in a few minutes. Okay, first one is power. Power is the energy level of a specific part of the kit. The bias. Bias is, there's a slider for bias, and what it does is if you move the slider, it kind of removes hits from either the beginning or the end of the bar, depending which way you're sliding. Okay. Power, bias, pocket. Okay. If a drummer is said to be playing in the pocket, that means that their timing is good. And it's not necessarily just that it's consistent, but it kind of refers to being on beat. And so, you know, a drummer can have impeccably consistent timing, exact consistent intervals between each beat, but if he or she is playing all of those beats slightly ahead of the beat or behind the beat, then that's when you get terms where you're not in the pocket, because in the pocket is consistent on the beat. So you can play ahead of the beat or behind the beat. So the pocket slider will relates to that. Okay. Snare ghosts. If you can get ghost notes on all pieces of your kit, but the snare is the most common. It's the most obvious. And basically a ghost note is when you kind of hit it, but not very hard. So it's just kind of like a faint version of a hit. And there's different ways to get ghost notes. Like you can either hit it lightly, or you can do like a double hit. So it's kind of hard to demonstrate without a drum. But when you hit it hard enough that your stick hits a full note the first time, but you've still got pressure on the stick, so it kind of, after it starts to bounce away, it goes back and hits a second time, so it's kind of like a boom boom. Okay, so that second note is a ghost snare. And you can get them on other parts of the kit, but like if you do a ghost on a tom, it's not very audible usually. And then the last thing is redirection. So let's say that, I don't know, redirection basically means that when a certain piece of the kit is hit, the sound for a different part of the kit plays. Okay, so maybe you'll have it set up so your floor tom, every time your floor tom hits, a kick drum plays. Okay, and you could rearrange the kit, I suppose, to put the kick drum in the place of the floor tom and stuff like that. But sometimes it's way easier just to use a redirection thing and just have it play a different sound. Okay. Okay, if there's any other terms, I'll explain them as we go through. Okay, so let's get to the brain. Now, we'll start off, we'll go into the menu. Okay, so lots of choices. You can load or save or extract styles or drummers. So, because you can mix and match stuff here. Down here, add. So you can add things like your snare ghosts. You can add shaker, cowbell, tambourine, tom groove, all sorts of stuff. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. What else can you do? Mapping MIDI controllers, showing controllers. So if you do have a MIDI controller and you're trying to figure out how to make controls on the controller, change controls within Jamstix, this is the way. Map your controller. And down here in fill options, This is one menu I don't like the way it's set up. Hopefully it's fixed by now. But basically, these little white dots beside the 4 choices mean they're all turned on. So right now, it will start fills with a crash, it will end fills with a crash, etc. If you go to turn one of these off, the menu disappears. So to get back into it, you have to click the drop down, you have to go to fill options again, and you can see I've turned it off. But it would be nice, because we have this back to brain menu thing up here, it would be nice to be able to click 3 or 4 things all at once and then go back to the brain menu. Anyway, just a little minor thing. Let's see. If you right click any of the labels, so here's a whole bunch of controls within the brain, and this is for the groove section. So if you go in the accent section or the fill section, you'll get different controls. But let's start with groove. And if you right click on one of the labels, you get this little menu. And this menu only applies to this specific element. So to change something on this one, you have to go into this guy's menu. Okay, so you can do all kinds of things, lots of choices. You can disable an element, you can freeze it, hide it, remove it, rename it, all kinds of stuff. Okay, and so going through these, if you look at them closely, you can usually figure out exactly what it does. Okay, so this one controls the power of the snare. Pretty straightforward. This one controls the power of the kick, power of the amount of 16th kick follow, main hats power, 8th hats power, 16th hats power, open hats power. So straightforward. Slider here for the amount of foot shuffle and skipping the hats. The feel. Okay, I talked about the pocket earlier. So this controls the pocket. How much variety there is in the timing, like is it always ahead of the pocket? You know, one direction is behind the pocket, one's ahead of the pocket. Is it always consistently ahead or behind, or does that vary a little bit? Does the power vary? Does the snare, does the hi-hat? Okay, redirection. So in this case, the old sound kick means when the kick is hit, low cymbals get played. Now it's turned off right now, but if you were to increase the amount, that would happen more and more frequently. Power hand. Power hand happens like, let's say you're tapping away at the hi-hat. If your power increases, a drummer might want to, for more energy, might want to switch his hand to hitting the ride cymbal or something like that. So that's how that controls. Now let's look at the accent page. A little more simple, but this one's so this only applies to the accent layer. This is the amount of cymbal use, ride accents. The bias, remember this kind of silences notes in either one end of the bar or the other, and so this is the amount that it does that. And then quick hats. So accents a little more simple. Now the fill. The fill generator here is pretty complex, so obviously the results here are going to be way more impressive than if you're using different software that just has very static MIDI patterns. So the length of the fill, so you can change the length for a transition fill, for a repetition fill. You can vary the length of the fill. Do you want it to be simple or not? So the focus of the fill. Do you want to have a lot of focus on the hats, or is it going to be more a little bit of the snare and a lot of toms? You can change that. The range of the toms, so you can imagine, and the direction, you can imagine on a kit, the drummer may start at one end, going from high to low, or may start at the other end, going from low to high. So you can change the direction for those fills. The structure, is the structure uniform? What's the emphasis of the snares versus toms? Any shuffle feel, snare crash, ghost hits, stuff like that can all be changed. Character. Now, are you going to have double strokes on the hi-hat and the snare? A little bit right now, none on the toms, but we could change that and have double strokes hitting on the toms. Down on the kick, choices, singles. You can pretend you've got a double kick pedal, play with stuff here. the ending. Do you have a hat ending? Does it end early sometimes or not? Open hat intro, hi-hat foot. So all kinds of change. You can really, really customize things with this fill generator and come up with all sorts of crazy stuff. Okay, so the last part of the main menu is the bar editor. And I think, considering how long this video is now, I'm going to save this for tutorial 4 in the series, okay? Okay, I think that's enough for this installment, this episode of the tutorial series. So we'll save the rest for part 4. Again, thanks for watching. Again, if you find these to be useful, I would love it if you could share these on some of your social media or music message boards. I don't like promoting myself, posting stuff about myself on message boards if I'm not a regular member of that community. But if you happen to be a member of the community and can post it, that's awesome. Okay? So I'll leave a link to my video list, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.